Hello, and welcome to another episode of the British English Podcast, the show that helps you better understand British culture and exposes you to advanced British English along the way. And in this one, I'm doing something a bit different. I'm trying to make sense of the madness, all of it. The wars, the tension, the stuff on the news that makes you want to just close the laptop and go for a walk. Because I don't know about you, but I've been looking at the world recently and thinking, what is going on? Like, genuinely, what is happening? And I think a lot of us are feeling that, right? This sort of low-level confusion that sits in the background. We're not directly in it, most of us, but we can feel it, and nobody seems to be explaining it in a way that actually makes sense to me. So I went down a rabbit hole, as I do, and what I found was, well, it's a lot, but it starts weirdly with Britain, which feels appropriate given that you're here learning British English. Now, I want to say up front, bit of a heavy start or preface, but I feel like it's necessary to say it. I think war and violence is the worst possible answer to anything, full stop. And I'm not here to pick sides or justify any of it, but I do think there's something to be said for understanding why it's happening. Because once you see the why, it stops feeling quite so random. And that, for me at least, helps a bit. Also, I'm not a historian. I'm not an economist. I'm just a language teacher with a podcast and a browser history that would raise questions. So if I get things wrong, tell me. Seriously, leave a comment. Set me straight, because I would very much like to be informed. Right, with that said, here we go. Although, before we start, you may well know this, but I'm deliberately dropping in intermediate to advanced phrases throughout this one to level up your vocabulary. Just like the phrase I said a second ago, set me straight. It's a bit idiomatic, right? Well, I've compiled a list of the best phrases I am about to expose you to and created a PDF for you to download for free right now to 3x your learning. How does it do that? It breaks the phrases down with clear, non-native friendly definitions, gives you natural examples and collocations, and then helps you actually use them with a few simple exercises. Because understanding is one thing, but being able to use the language yourself is where the real progress happens. So, if you want to take this episode a lot further, you can grab that for free by scanning the QR code on screen or hitting the link in the show notes or description. That will take you to this screen where you just pop your name and email down and I'll send it straight to your email inbox. All right, with that said, let's get into it. I think this part should be headlined, "The phone call that ended an empire." Oh, that sounds good. I mean, powerful, right? I'm not going to throw too many dates at you, maybe 4, 5 dates. I'm not going to be too facts heavy, but, there are some. So, 1956, a year to appreciate, right? Because in 1956, Britain still thinks it's running the show. Military bases everywhere, an empire that once ruled a quarter of the planet. The pound, British pound, one of the most important currencies on earth. Then Egypt's president nationalizes the Suez Canal, which was basically the motorway between Europe and Asia on the sea. But, a really big, important connector between Europe and Asia. Crucial for trade, crucial for oil. And Britain took that personally. So Britain, France, and Israel invaded. And militarily, they were winning. But then, phone call, hello, America on the other end, and the message was essentially stop. Stop right now, or we will destroy you and your currency. And you might think, hang on, how does that even work? How can one country wreck another country's money? So the simplest way to explain it Imagine you run a shop, right? You run a shop, and your shop only survives because one very rich customer keeps coming back. And they hold loads of loyalty cards, your store credit, everything. Now imagine that customer walks into the local market and sells all of it at a massive discount. Everyone panics. Everyone thinks your shop's done for. The value of everything connected to you crashes. That's basically what America threatened to do with the British pound. Just dump it all, crash its value, and on top of that, they blocked Britain's emergency loan. So Britain's last safety net was gone. Within days, Britain pulled out of Egypt, not because it lost the fight, but because it couldn't afford to keep fighting. And that right there is the thing I want you to hold on to. The country that controls the money controls the outcome. Now, this didn't happen out of nowhere. Britain had been in decline for decades. Back in the 1800s, the pound was basically the world's currency. Everyone used it, and that gave Britain this incredible power to borrow and spend and still be fine because the world needed the British pound. Sound familiar to what's happening right now? Yeah? We'll get there. So by the late 1800s, America had already overtaken Britain economically. But the pound stayed on top because the whole system was built around it. And changing a reserve currency is a bit like trying to swap the engine of a plane while it's still flying. Nobody wants to go first, because if you're a country holding loads of pounds and you suddenly switch to something else, you're basically announcing that you think the pound is finished, which tanks the value of all the pounds you're still holding on to. So everyone's kind of stuck. Everyone knows the system's shifting, but no one wants to be the one that triggers the collapse. It's a bit like when everyone at a dinner party knows it's time to leave, but no one wants to be the first person to stand up, right? And then World War I happens. Britain borrowed loads, went from the world's biggest lender to one of the biggest borrowers. And instead of accepting that reality, Britain pretended nothing had changed. It went back to the gold standard at the old rate, which basically means they said £1 is still worth what it was before the war, even though it wasn't. Even though the country behind it was way weaker. It was pride over reality. And economists pretty much all agree it was a disaster. Then World War II. More debt. By 1945, Britain owed more than its entire economy produced in a year. And still, it was pretending for another decade, spending like a superpower, acting like a superpower, right up until that phone call in 1956, when America reminded them that they weren't a superpower anymore. So after that moment in 1956, the Suez Canal, the power shifted to America. The dollar replaced the pound. But the clever bit here that America did is that they didn't just inherit the system, but they built a new one. In the early 70s, America came off the gold standard, which meant the dollar was no longer backed by anything physical. It was just paper. And paper is only worth something if people believe in it. So the dollar needed a new foundation. And in 1974, Washington found one. A quiet deal with Saudi Arabia. Saudi oil would be sold exclusively in US dollars. In return, the US would provide military protection, weapons, and political support. So once Saudi agreed, the rest of OPEC followed. That's the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries. Basically, the club of the world's biggest oil producers. And just like that, every country on earth that needs oil, which is every country on earth, now had to hold US dollars. Oil demand became dollar demand. And that's kept the dollar on top for 50 years. And this is why wars in oil-rich countries are never just about the oil. They're about what currency the oil is sold in, because that's where the real power sits. And this is where it gets a bit uncomfortable, because people have often pointed out a pattern. And I want to be honest, some of this is verified, some is speculation, and some of it is a bit conspiracy theory-ish. But the pattern goes like this. In 2000, Iraq started selling oil in euros. 3 years later, the US invaded. In 2009, Libya proposed a gold-backed African currency. 2 years later, Gaddafi was gone. Venezuela, sitting on the biggest oil reserves on the planet, explored deals with China to sell oil in yuan, or Chinese currency. And the US has been tightening the screws on them ever since. Is that a coincidence? Maybe. Each situation had its own complex reasons, but it's a thread that's hard to ignore, and people much smarter than me have been pulling on it for years. So, Britain had a currency that ruled the world, borrowed too much, spent too much on its military, assumed the system would last forever. Then one day, it didn't. America now has a currency that rules the world, but they also have record debt and exploding interest payments. They also have military bases in about 80 countries, and this deep, unquestioned assumption that the dollar will always be the dollar. But China's been quietly building an alternative, something called CIPS, the cross-border interbank payment system, basically its own version of the global payments network. So countries can trade through Chinese infrastructure instead of American. China's also doing oil deals in their local currency, and Iran's been bypassing the dollar for years. And the dollar's share of global reserves has been slipping from about 71% in 1999 to about 58% recently. So nobody's actually saying the dollar's about to collapse, but the direction of travel is what worries people, because Britain's decline was the same, gradual, decades of it, and then one day, very sudden. Which brings us to right now. Netanyahu, the Israeli leader, has been pushing for military action against Iran for over 30 years, speech after speech. And for most of that time, America said no. But recently, the chess pieces moved. Hamas was weakened. Hezbollah was hit hard. Syria collapsed. Israel did practice runs bombing Iran in 24 and 25. And with Trump back in the White House, the green light was on. Now, the official reason was Iran's nuclear program. Trump said Iran was an imminent threat, though what I've read, intelligence didn't fully back that up. And to get even more uncomfortable, just days before the strikes, Oman announced that Iran had agreed to downgrade its uranium and accept full inspections. So a diplomatic breakthrough was apparently within reach, and then the bombs fell anyway. I'm not going to tell you what to make of that, but when you've just spent this whole episode learning how America protects the dollar through military involvement in oil-rich regions, and Iran happens to be sitting on the world's third largest oil reserves, right next to the most important oil checkpoint on Earth, I mean, you at least have to ask the question, don't you? So, February 2026, the US and Israel strike Iran. They kill the supreme leader, hit nuclear sites, cities, Iran hits back, and then it does something that is pretty impactful for everyone. It closes the Strait of Hormuz. Now, the Strait of Hormuz, if you haven't heard of it, you're about to understand why it matters. It's a narrow bit of sea at the bottom of the Persian Gulf, right off the coast of Iran. Think of the Persian Gulf as a big bottle of oil, and the Strait of Hormuz is the neck. Everything has to squeeze through it to get out. And when I say everything, I mean about 20% of the world's oil passes through it every day, a fifth of everything. And you might think, well, America produces its own oil, doesn't it? And 80% of the oil comes from other places. But oil is priced globally, meaning a shortage anywhere pushes prices up everywhere. And it's not just petrol, it's food, transport, medicine, plastics, fertilizers, packaging. When oil goes up, everything goes up. But here's what I found most fascinating. Iran didn't blockade the strait with warships. It attacked a handful of ships, just a handful. But insurance companies looked at that and said, we're out. They cancelled war risk coverage. And without insurance, no one is sending a billion-dollar tanker through a war zone. So traffic dropped 80% in 24 hours. So Iran didn't close the strait with missiles, it closed it with fear and insurance premiums, which is rather clever and terrifying when you think about it. And we haven't experienced the worst of it, unfortunately, because the tankers that bring us our oil move at roughly the speed of a bicycle. So pre-crisis shipments kept going or kept being delivered, and the real squeeze has been building slowly. As those last loads dock and the next ones don't actually come, that's when it's all going to hit us a lot harder. And that will be around about when this episode releases, depending on which country you're talking about. Some of the countries have already been hit hard already, but some further afield are being hit later. And then, because apparently this story needed one more twist, Iran set up a toll. Ships get routed through Iranian waters, escorted by patrol boats for a price of about $2 million. I mean, I just went through France driving in my car, and I thought the motorway tolls were hefty. But not quite $2 million. Although a loaded oil tanker might be carrying $200 million of cargo to sell at the end. So 2 million is about 1%. So I guess the, CEOs of the big shipping companies would be thinking, right, do we want to risk losing $1 billion ship or just take the 1% hit? The maths sort of answers it easily, right? And the detail that made my jaw drop, some of those tolls, they're being paid in Chinese currency, not dollars. So the strait that carries a fifth of the world's oil that's been sold in dollars for 50 years, now is controlled by Iran, paid for in Chinese currency, is a big shift. It's not legal. It's in international waters. But when someone's bombing your country, maritime law probably isn't the top of your list. And I think most of us, whether we agree with it or not, can understand the logic of that, right? Again, not agreeing with any of this. It just seems logical to see the back and forth of that. And it seems like Trump thought this would be straightforward, but Iran turned the strait into leverage. It's choosing who gets through. China, Russia, India, yes. America, Israel, no. And America's now trying to reopen something that wasn't closed before it got involved. And this is why it's not ending, because neither side can afford to back down. For Trump, reopening that strait is now the whole point of the war. If he walks away and Iran still controls the world's most important oil choke point, that's not just a military failure. That's the dollar losing its grip in real time on camera in front of the whole world. That's the one thing America cannot let happen. And then for Iran, well, they've got nothing left to lose. Their supreme leader is dead. Their cities have been bombed, but they're still standing. And as long as they control that narrow bit of water, they have something that no amount of bombs can take away. Leverage. Real, tangible. The whole world needs this kind of leverage. So why would they give that up? So both sides are locked in. And that's why the violence keeps escalating. It's not madness, it's maths. Horrible, brutal maths, but maths and egos. So where does this leave us? I don't actually know, if I'm going to be honest. I told you at the start I'm not the expert here, but I think we've got somewhere, because the world isn't as random as it looks. Because if you follow the money, follow the currency, ask who controls the oil and what currency it's sold in, and a lot of the chaos starts to make a kind of horrible sense. Doesn't make it right, doesn't make it less terrifying, but it stops it feeling senseless. And I think that matters, because when things feel senseless, I start to switch off. I don't know about you. And that is when people making these decisions get to do whatever they want without anyone asking why. Right. Now, this was obviously a bit of a departure from the usual style of episode. I'm aware of that. And whether you see that as a good thing or a bad thing is entirely your opinion, and you're entitled to that opinion. But here's the thing about being an independent podcaster. What I consume directly affects what I want to talk to you about week in, week out. And by consume, I don't mean my food, although I suppose that could have an effect. I mean the articles I read, the rabbit holes I fall down, the things that sometimes keep me up at night. That stuff finds its way into the show. It just does. I promise I'm not going to turn this into a geopolitics podcast. I'm still very much a man who lives by variety is the spice of life. But what I have done today, I hope, is given you some proper listening practice. And either you're someone who already knows a lot about this stuff, in which case get in the comments and educate me genuinely, and you've created some active writing practice, because I want that. I want to be informed. Or maybe this has helped shed a bit of light on what's happening in the world around us. And, of course, you've picked up some intermediate to advanced British English expressions along the way. So either way, I think that's a fairly decent use of your time. Regardless, I think it's time for a cup of tea, maybe even a lie down. Although, before you go, if you've enjoyed this episode, and especially if you found yourself thinking, I understand this, but I'm not sure I could explain it like that myself, that's exactly the gap I focus on inside the Academy. Because it's one thing to follow along with ideas like the phrase follow the money, or go down a rabbit hole, or a thread that people keep pulling on. But it's another thing entirely to actually use those kinds of phrases naturally in your own conversations. And that's where most learners get stuck, especially beyond B2. They consume, they nod along, they think, yeah, that makes sense. But when it's their turn to speak, it all just sort of slips through their fingers. So inside the Academy, I take episodes like this, I break down the language, grammar, and pronunciation properly, and then I help you activate the language by becoming part of a delightful community of other like-minded English learners. So you're not just understanding British English, you're actually living in it week by week, using it, playing with it, making it your own. Because fluency isn't about knowing more at this stage necessarily. It's about being able to take messy, complex ideas and colloquial phrases and make sense of them out loud in real time in a way that actually makes people want to listen. So if that's something you want to work on, check out the Academy by clicking the link in the description or show notes, or simply searching thebritishenglishpodcast.com/academy. But for those who don't want to take that next step, then I highly encourage you to grab that free worksheet that goes along with this episode so that you can 3x your learning today. It goes over some of the best intermediate to advanced vocabulary that came up and gives you non-native friendly definitions, clear example sentences, along with natural collocations, and then some exercises to get you in the active learning stage, which is essential when improving your language skills. To get that, scan the QR code on screen right now, or click the link in the show notes, description, or comments section. All right, get out of here, you. I've been Charlie, your host. See you next time on the British English Podcast.